Good morning, family. Stone Live here, and Wednesday, Wednesday morning on the East Coast, up early as always. Um, Out here running, trying to make sense of everything. Big storm coming. They're talking about what they call a bomb cyclone. So once again, the words that they use, present an ominous picture. It just sounds dangerous. So I figure I would get out here early and start to quasi prepare myself for this this ugly rendition of what wintertime can be. When she throws everything at you. And but as I said before, and what we consider to be bad is in nature is just a part of the process. So we buckle up and we do the best we can. We don't curse she or he or it. We just accept and embrace it and hope that we can get through it. We do know that there will be some people, that there will be some casualties, some collateral damage, some fatalities. But as odd as that may sound, and as cruel as it may sound, that too is a part of the process. Nature's in a cleanup. There's a cycle that she goes through, an age that she goes through every 2,200 years. And when we reach a certain age or a certain stage in the planetary cycle, there's cleaning up that has to be done on a major scale. There's switching up of regions where now once it was cold it becomes moderate and hot, and where it was hot now it becomes unseasonably, cool. That's part of the process. That's nature kind of going through her cycle, going through her period. The same way women go through their period on a much lesser scale, nature goes through her period. And as opposed to every 9 months, hers may take every 9,000 years. But that's just how it goes. So for those of us that are in tune, we prepare. We do what we have to do in order to put ourselves in the best position to survive. And then we hope that our provisions prove to be successful. But outside of that, the courts have now made a positive statement as it relates to these so-called mandates. They have suspended them, and particularly here, specifically here in New York. Um, but like I said before, what I do notice is that in local municipalities, I guess those municipalities that have through devolution inherited certain type of sovereignty, if you will. They still kind of enforcing their own kind of policy. Certain stores are still kind of imposing their own mass mandates, contrary to what the federal level stipulates. Biden is still kind of pushing the program, so to speak. The pharmaceutical companies, who have already made billions, are still kind of pushing, their poison, if you will, for lack of a better word. And once you think about it, you hear them say, well, the pharmaceutical companies are making all this money. But, where do the pharmaceutical companies get their money from? You know, the pharmaceuticals company, vicariously through governments get their money from the people. So how is it that these trustees who make investments with these pharmaceutical companies are making all this money, but the people are sitting here impoverished, are sitting here as paupers, are sitting here with no homes, no Medicaid, no food. How is that possible? I really hope that once we kind of move into this next stage of human evolution, that the people kind of reclaim their positions as being the true propagators of government, uh, the true licensors of government, the true uh, perpetrators of those laws which we give assent to, and which we entrust those people that we put into positions to uphold and adhere to. Um, Essentially that we as the people, kind of find our true place, right? Because there's no such thing as a government that's rich without the people putting them in positions to be rich. And when I say government, that's rather an inanimate statement. In other words, government represents, or people that we put in certain positions represent government. And see, now once you look at it from the standpoint of persons that we put in positions to do certain things which now facilitate the operations of government, we now can now therefore hold those people accountable, right? So now instead of saying, well, I'm going to sue New York State, no, I'm going to sue Susie Joe who worked for New York State. And that's how I'm going to make this idea, this corporate idea of New York State responsible. You have to start going after the people themselves that hide behind the veil of this corporate, signature, this corporate entity, this corporate appellation that goes by specific names. And so that's how, moving forward, we the people are going to hold these persons, these people that we put into positions to facilitate the laws and facilitate the agendas, the operations, the purpose of government to task. And so that's what we're going to have to more or less confront once we move into the next stage, or into the next cycle of life. But outside of that, we also have the big games coming up this week. We had a beautiful game in Buffalo with Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes. I really felt that um, the Bills were going to pull it out. Especially them representing New York State. It didn't happen, but maybe next year, we'll tighten up on some things. Leslie Frazier will figure out a way on defense to, stop the last 13-second drive, and maybe we can bring it home next year. There's always next year for those that, God willing, make it to next year. And assuming that Josh and the rest of those athletes over there in Buffalo make it, I think they will be all right. Allen, what's his name? Kyle Irving is back on the floor for the Nets. There's been some backlash by other athletes, older athletes, bygone athletes who feel that Kyle Irving should be more responsible as it relates to his position, as it relates to his status as a anti-vaxxer, or not necessarily anti-vaxxer, but a person who basically, has made a decision about what he wants to do as it relates to his body, and a person who is actively and proactively exercising that right. I was surprised that Shaquille, made the statements that he did, but then again, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. There were others, Magic Johnson, who, was a hero of mine growing up as a kid, and a person who fought his own battles, who had to deal with his own demons as being a victim of the so-called AIDS virus. Who is so outspoken now about those, this generation of athletes now who have, taken, positions contrary to what obviously they feel that they should. Maybe it represents the sign of the times. It represents uh, the plethora of ideas that people adhere to and that people live by. But as I said before, I believe that Kyrie is a strong representation of what, in my mind, not only an athlete, but what a man should be. A man has to be resolute in his position, right or wrong, and he has to go with that to the grave. He has to take that to the grave, not just for his own well being and his own mental state, but for those that follow, those sons and nephews that follow, those daughters that look for a certain brand of man, a certain kind of man that's going to represent or be representative in their offspring, in their own children, in their own sons, in their heroes. These are the kind of examples that our daughters and our sons need growing up, and particularly what we have lacked in the so-called black community. Um, Also, there's uh, the situation with the Ukraine and Russia. They're talking about possible, invasions. We know what's going on out there in the South Pacific with China and Taiwan and those places like that. It's interesting. I was talking to a lady. She's in my building, and she's from Korea. And this is what I never knew. And it's ironic because what you think is singular to oneself or to yourself or to a particular people, it really happens all over the world. Essentially it's nothing new under the sun. And so I was asking, I said, well, who are the Koreans as opposed to the Chinese? She said, well, the Koreans are the Chinese. We're just a sect of those Chinese or Manchurians who got kicked out. And so they moved us to another part of an island, and then we had to fight those people that were indigenous to that island, and we ended up moving them out or moving them up in the mountains. I said, wow. I said, are you serious? I said, so you're telling me that the Chinese and the Koreans and the Manchurians and all of them, she said, we're all the same people. She said it was just one tribe or one clan who fought a war and conquered and displaced the other. And then in turn, those people who were displaced went to another place and displaced those people who were the same people, who eat the same foods, who basically speak the same language. Same thing that happened with the so-called, Asiatic people who traveled across the strait and went into the, Europa and the Iberian Peninsula, conquered those people, the Gales who moved the Picts out, and, the Picts who fought with the Britons, and then you had the Scots who came over, who were all the same people. And then, quite naturally, you had the Horde that came in, the Golden Horde that came in, in 59 AD, 49 AD, and fought with those people who had displaced the other people and moved those so-called Scots up into the highlands, and then they took over the lowlands. And those were essentially white and black people living side by side. This thing has happened over the course of human history, of human evolution, of human culture. It's always been about people conquering and displacing other people, and in some cases removing, in some cases genociding out another. And so for those people that never realized that those Scots, those Gales, those Irish, those Welsh, those people, look just like, you and I. But they never called themselves black. They called themselves Scottish, or Irish, or Welsh. Those are the people that, contrary to what we were told about West Africa, those slaves that were transported over here. And that's not to say that they weren't, because, from what I understand in my studies, you had a lot of West Africans that came over here too. But you had a lot of the Scotch and Gales and Irish that came over here and started this whole thing as it relates to successful colonization over here in what they call America. And see, now this brings me to the point of this whole thing that they're doing now in the UK, the bill that they're trying to pass with the status, refugee status, and becoming stateless as a result of your citizenship being snatched away from you. And, my question is, well, who are the real Britons? Is it a person that was born there and has lived there for 3 or 4 generations or 5 generations, but whose ancestors descended from another place? Or is it those indigenous people that were moved out of what is now considered to be Britain or the UK? Right? Who are those people? Would it be those people that came over here, the Scotch, the Irish, and the Welsh, who are all essentially, from what some people say, all essentially the same people that were now transported over here as a result of being conquered or persecuted because of their religious beliefs and pushed out, and now who now call themselves Americans? Are they the real British? Who are the real British? Certainly not the person that was naturalized and calls himself, by virtue of their naturalization, British. No, that is a precarious state. As well as those people who call themselves Americans, who came over here, through the Ellis Island, came here as a result of bilateral contracts and unilateral contracts that were made between so-called sovereigns. Would you be American? You have to find out, people, who you are, because this is real now. I mean, all you have to do now is go on social media, and once you start looking up, this whole thing in relation to the bill that they're being passed with, uh, pursuant to your citizenship status and being stateless. This has been going on now for the past 10 years. They've been talking about this thing. So I guess my point is that they've been, they've had this in the works for a while, you know. And over in India for the last couple of years, they have several people now in camps who were in India for X amount of years, or Hindustan, the ancient name for India, who now have been declared stateless and whose citizenship has been taken away. That whole thing that was going on over there in India with Pakistan and, when they had the wars over there, then you had a lot of people from Pakistan running into India who weren't indigenous to India, but as a result of, the situation and circumstance, maybe they married somebody, or, just fleeing Pakistan, came over to India and, over the course of time gained citizenship, but artificial citizenship, not real citizenship. Just like, the great Taj Tariq says, citizenship really is you announcing who your mother is as it relates to the topographic or geographic, you know, source that spawned you as a people, that spawned your people. So when you start talking about nationalizing, right, what you're really talking about is going back home. When you start talking about, snatching people's citizenship and making them stateless, what you're really saying is it's time for you to go back home. So what we have to do now, and I've been talking this, sporadically throughout the course of these so-called, quasi podcasts, is that you really have to start focusing on who you are and where you come from. It's no coincidence that, all these genealogies and this and that and DNA and all this thing has been running concurrent with this whole citizenship theme, this whole refugee thing, this whole nationalization thing. Uh, you know, uh, these topics that have now seemed to have arisen and popped up out of nowhere. It's no coincidence. It's no accident that, it's time to start digging and finding out who you are. Because, you know, once the corporate entity that essentially spawned you as it relates to you being a citizen that claimed you, once that's over, once they've gone bankrupt, because that's what corporations do. See, nations don't go bankrupt, corporations do. So once the corporation, essentially reaches its end, once the contract is up, once the lease is up, essentially those people that came under the corporate construct as so-called citizens, a British citizen under the British corporation, an American citizen under US Inc. That's up too. Now you have to go back into your ancestors and find out where they came from and find out if they truly have a place here on the so-called American soil. And remember, America is a continent, so it's not a country. So, all that was part of the corporate, structure, the corporate structural story that was given to essentially to the employees who were always employees. They were never citizens because, as you know, you can't be a citizen of a corporation, right? So you can never be a citizen of a corporation. So you were always just an employee. So when they say, well, America has 365 million citizens, what they're saying is that America has 365 million employees. This is why we have EID numbers. This is why you have Social Security numbers. That's all tied into the employee status. When you go up and you look into the US Inc. and you look at, the number of employees they have, it'll tell you. It's no secret. So, it's time that you get down to the root of it and you start to embrace certain truths. And so this way you can gain an understanding about what's happening before it's too late, before, you're in front of that military tribunal or that military officer or that census officer who's asking you, well, listen, who are you? Because it's time to go. The jig is up now. We're going to set up shop somewhere else, but we have to close this. First, we have to shut this down. And so, now we have to find out who you are, and then we'll contact, those, those people that represent whatever nation you're from, and see if they're going to take you back. And if not, then maybe we'll ship you to another place and see if they want you. And if not, then, we'll see what we're going to do from here. But definitely you're going to have to leave here. If you're not from here, if you're not, through consanguinity from here, if you don't have, blood ties here on this soil, this mother, which is the mother of your mother and your mother and your mother and your mother. This is what it comes down to. Forget everything else that they told you, because that was, that was part of the corporate story. They had to do what they had to do. But were they going to tell you the truth? They told you the truth, this thing would have never worked. Okay, but now that it's over with, now you have to know the truth, and you have to be able to kind of deal with that. So now you can move on into the next stage. They're already talking about it. You go to some of these social media platforms, they're inadvertently, letting you know that, listen, You go back. It's going to be nice to go back home to the land of your ancestors. They're talking about this. This is nothing new. So they're setting the stage, and in their minds, they've been setting the stage for the last 10, 15 years. Now it's open. Now they're snatching citizenship. Now that now you got a bunch of refugees walking around here that have to be detained and that have to be shipped out. There's a guy who he owns a gym. He has a gym. He's been running his gym business for the last 20 years. You know, hard times hit, the economy's not doing so bad. People decided that, they'd rather work at home or go to the park and jog. They into the organic way of kind of, getting their bodies in shape. They don't need the artificial means, treadmills and things like that. So he has to shut down. So he shuts down, but the problem is he has a lot of stock. Well, what's the stock? Well, the stock is the treadmills, the punching bags, all these, accoutrements that kind of go along with the business. Hey, Marvin, what's up? I'll be there in 15 minutes, Marvin. All right. Which goes along with running the business of, a gym. So what does he do with the stock? Well, sometimes he might have a fire sale, right? Or if he's opening up another gym, he'll take that with him. But, in most cases, if that's going to be the end of that particular, enterprise, he gets rid of the stock, right? He discards the stock. He sells it, in other words, once he gets out of the business, the stock has to go, right? The employees generally have to find another job, right? They, listen, I'm sorry, here's your pink slip. It didn't work out, right? So the employees are gone. It's over with. It's time for you to move on to something different. Well, on a much larger scale, that's what happens with, the corporations, the big corporations, right? You've seen it. Especially now over the past 2 years with everything going on, they've gotten on, on the Zoom thing and told guys, that on that morning, listen, we just laid off 9,000 of you. No need to come in, right? And see what you have to understand too is about these corporations that are firing 9,000 people. These smaller corporations, outside of the conglomerate. Is that they're all under the umbrella of the conglomerate, right? They're not separate from the conglomerate. They're all under the conglomerate. The conglomerate is what? The conglomerate is U.S. Inc., right? United States Inc. or Incorporated, the United States Corporation. And all those other small corporations and franchise come under the much bigger one, under the umbrella of U.S. Inc. So now that U.S. Inc. is broke, or should I say it's bankrupt, what does it do with its employees? What does it do with its stock? Well, who's the stock? Let's figure that out first. Well, who's the stock? Well, the stock, is considered to be all those things that are associated with the runnings and operations and the facilitations of the business, of the corporation, of the conglomerate. And that's where the human stock, i.e. the employees, right? They fall into that category. You fall into that category. So now that the operations of the conglomerate have gone bankrupt and essentially are closing, it's time for them to get rid of the stock, to get rid of the employees, or to get rid of those descendants that, that through their ancestors, gained a foothold as an employee in the corporation, right? And through corporate succession have maintained a living, have been able to put their their children in school, have been able to provide for their children as a result of the corporate succession coming down from their initial right ancestors that came over here with the opportunity to work for the corporation that we were told was a country. Say, for instance, right, you work at McDonald's, right? You work at McDonald's. You flip hamburgers, that's what you do. There's nothing wrong with that. It's a noble job. All right. So when you're at McDonald's, you're not going to go in there and, break out the grill, stuff the hamburgers with, feta cheese and, serve it under the banner of McDonald's. It just doesn't work that way. Right. So in other words, there's a certain protocol as it relates to making hamburgers that you have to follow when you're working at McDonald's. Right. So now when you leave McDonald's, you want to go home and make your own hamburger, right? So you don't go home and then, bring, the guideline book on how to make McDonald's hamburgers and make them at your home. No. Nor is your manager or your boss going to be calling you up at home in your private place and say to you, listen, what are you doing? If you don't make them hamburgers the way I tell you, you're going to be fired. What are you talking about? I'm at home. I'm in my private place making burgers the way I want to make them. You can't tell me what to do when I'm at home making my own burgers. I'm not at McDonald's no more. So in other words, I'm in my private place. I'm not at work. I'm not at the job. I can live my life and make my hamburgers the way I want them. But you were fooled, weren't you? You were always taught that once you left the job, essentially, you were still on the job. And then that later turned into jurisdiction. That later turned into, you have to do what we tell you all the time, even when you leave the job. But see, you never knew that, working for the United States Corporation was a job. You never knew that. You always handled the job as something that you were doing in relation to a national position, as a national citizen. And that's why you were told that you were a citizen. Because if they told you that it was just a job, then, they couldn't do the things that they were doing as it relates to, exercising a certain type of authority over you, right? Telling you how you had to drive down the street, right? Giving you a license, telling you that you had to get permission from them. That's the job. I'm not on the job now, right? When you go home, technically speaking, you're not at the job. But 365 million people or employees who work for United States Incorporated, when they leave their jobs as a school teacher, as a nurse, as a fireman, as a policeman, they still think that, for some reason, they're on the job, or at least they act like it, because those people that, quote unquote, exercise authority over them under the jurisdiction of their workplace now translates into those people under the guise of government for a corporation, right? Exercising rights over you in your private life, in your private home. They're telling you how you can make hamburgers when you're at home. They're telling you how to drive when you're at home. They're telling you how to park your car when you're at home, right? They're telling you where to stand in line at when you're at home. You're not on the job anymore, but they're still telling you what to do. So this is where we're at. And we've been flipping hamburgers really, for McDonald's at the job and at home for the last 250 years because we were told that we were citizens of a corporation when we were never citizens. And therefore, as a result of that, we never really, with any kind of fervor, pursued or or identify with our own true nationalities. We never kept up um, in step with our cultures. We never sought out information about, who we were and where we really came from, and who our mothers and fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers and great grandmothers, and who they were and what they represented. And so, as a result of the corporation, you know, um, taking over our education, taking over our minds as it relates to the culture. You understand what I'm saying? We lost our true culture and came under the fabricated culture of the corporate entity. Because what? Because it served their end, didn't serve yours, and it never meant to. And if this thing could go on forever, the corporate thing, the corporate entity, if it never went bankrupt, then for most people that would be okay. The problem is that it's finally come to an end. And see, this is where all the confusion is coming into play in all of the politics. And so, it's much deeper than that. But, I tried to kind of, simplify it as much as I can. And so now, essentially, it's time for you to go back home. And home is where your ancestors came from. That's where home is. That's where home is. So you have to find out where that is. You have to find out where your ancestors came from. You have to find out where on the map, on the real maps. Remember, not the maps that the corporate entity gave us, the real maps. Because, it's the locations, geographically speaking, that determine who you are. In other words, if I say that I'm from Mali, as it relates to a fake map, then you're not really from Mali. Because the soil is what determines who the people are and where they came from. So you have to get in line with the proper maps, the ancient maps in this case, because we're talking about, for most people, our ancestors came over here, what, 400 or 500 years ago, 300 years ago. So you have to find out, you have to refer to those maps. And then from those maps, you say, okay, well, here's Mali on the real map, or here's England on the real map, not this fake map that they gave us. And that's where I'm from, right? It's the topography that determines where you're from, right? So if you're saying that you're Berber, well, that means that you're from Northwest Africa. You're from Libya. You could be from Mali. You might be from Iberia. You could be from so-called Kemet, or what's known as Egypt, because that's where the Berbers are indigenous to, right? You have to find out the proper place on the proper map where you're from, and that's the only way you're going to find out. We've been caught up in this trick bag for a long time. It's unfortunate, and nobody's totally innocent. We've all, got caught up in this whole process of greed and avarice and selfishness, and for a lot of us, really this is in reference to our ancestors, a lot of them thought that they were doing the right thing by us. So we can't really blame them. A lot of them that were persecuted over in England and Scotland and Wales and had to come over here, the Huguenots, the ones who were fighting for their lives and, essentially were nomadic as a result of that, as a result of them being nomads, but a lot of that had to do with, them being constantly on the run. Because they were fleeing certain places. They were being persecuted, killed, assassinated. They were never safe. And so, this is why they had to go under the cover of other names, And even, as a result of that, a lot of the culture was lost. So you have to, really buckle down while there's time, people. We're running out of time. And you'll find, too, it's also, once you start to discover certain things about your family, about your history, about your ancestors, you're going to discover just how truly beautiful it is. You know, how uplifting it is, how it empowers you when you find out who your people were. And you also realize why, too, that they couldn't tell you who you really were. They couldn't tell you. If you knew that your people, were kings and queens, if you knew that your people had vast estates over in Europe and in Ireland, if you knew that your people fought in battles and wars and were, top merchants and seafarers, if you found that out, you wouldn't been out here doing the things that you was doing I know I wouldn't have been. I wouldn't have been out here when I was young doing the wild stuff I was doing if I'd known that my people were shipbuilders. My people were loaning monies to kings and kingdoms back in the in the 1400s and 1200s. That my people go all the way back to the ancient traders of Phoenicia and Carthage. I wouldn't have been doing what I was doing. Are you kidding me? Mm-mm. I'd be out there trying to live what's in my blood, trying to be what's in my blood, what exists in me, and what that I can never denounce because it's in me, because I am what is running through my veins. But you have to know that. If you don't know that, then you can't be that. You'll be lost. You have to find out what's in your veins and what soil is attributed to that. And now you have nationality. See, just knowing who you are is only part of the nationality quagmire. You have to not only know who you are, but you have to know which soil on this great God-given earth is attributed to that. It's a nice day out here. It's cold out here in the Northeast region, people. But, hopefully that information that I just gave you can warm you up. Until next time, talk to you later.